This is a relay project.
The Discourse starts right now with Cheryl Oates and Erica Barudis.
Welcome back to The Discourse, our last episode of the season before our summer break, and we are going out with a bang.
Yeah, we are pleased to have Premier Smith joining us on the show today. In just a couple minutes, we'll be asking her your questions and some of our own pressing questions.
But first, none of this would be possible without our sponsors. If, like so many of us, you are in spring cleaning and organizing mode, look no further than California Closets. They have custom organizational solutions for closets, workspaces, garages that will have you breathing easier when everything in your house has a perfect spot. Their custom design team can help find solutions for any space and any budget. For more information and even a little inspiration, visit californiaclosets.ca.
And now, without further ado, my former boss, an individual that I think we're evening out the amount of time we've been on the same team campaigning versus against each other. And one of the first individuals that I called when I decided to put my name forward on a ballot for Senate, as I knew she would tell me the good, the bad, and the ugly of putting your name forward and running for office. With that, welcome to The Discourse, Premier Danielle Smith.
Nice to see you, Erica. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, Premier Smith. Thank you so much for making the time to be on the show today. We don't have the same politics. As you know, I'm a longtime New Democrat, and obviously I come to this conversation with admitted bias. And despite that, you've agreed to come on the show. So thank you for that. I have some pointed questions for you today, and I welcome your pointed answers. As I have said many, many times on this show, your communication style and your skill is unmatched. So we welcome a candid and honest conversation today. My first question is, it's been almost exactly 1 year since you won the provincial election, and your first year of this mandate has not been without controversy. You introduced 3 bills that strip the rights of local municipalities. You've announced a policy that inserts the government between trans youth and their doctors, actually rolling back the rights of parents. And you've pushed ahead with plans to leave CPP despite pretty widespread opposition. So 1 year in, looking back at all of this, do you have any regrets?
Well, look, I would say on a couple of things. First of all, I don't think that any of us are that far apart on the political spectrum. I remember when I was in politics the first time, being able to find some areas of agreement with the New Democrats. And we always knew that if the New Democrats and the Conservatives agreed, that was probably the right policy decision. So I always do try to find those areas of common ground. I would say that, look, you put forward policy. Sometimes there's going to be controversy. Sometimes there's going to be some feedback. Sometimes you have to make a couple of adjustments. We've made a couple of adjustments to one of the bills to clarify what it is that we are attempting to do. We still have more work that we're doing in rolling out our policy to protect the right of children to be able to make decisions as adults that are going to affect their long-term ability to have children themselves. So we have more work to do on consulting on the implementation on that. And we also put in pension protection legislation. As I said, I said we were going to release the report because it had started out a couple of years ago. And I said that we would consult on it and get feedback from Albertans on whether or not they want a referendum. I firmly believe that if we're going to make any decisions on a pension plan, it's got to be put to the voters. And so we're still waiting for more information on that. But I can say that, not everything gets rolled out perfectly. And so you listen, you get feedback, you adjust, and you move forward.
So yes or no to regrets?
I don't have any regrets about the general direction that we're taking. I mean, as I said, there's no one perfect answer to any policy problem. You try, you do your best. You think that you're addressing the issues that you hear about. We want to be a government that solves problems. We hear about problems, and we are going to put forward what we think is our best solution to solve them, and consult along the way. Not everything is implemented perfectly. It's part of the reason why you've got 3 readings of bills in the legislature, so that you can make amendments as you go. And so we'll continue to listen and make adjustments as we need to.
So, Premier, I remember after we did your swearing in and we headed to the legislature and you were getting a tour and you walked into the Premier's office, your new office, and you were like, wow, this is really, really big. Like, this is quite an office. And so kind of taking you back, you've now been Premier for 18 months. You've had a mandate from Albertans as the Premier for, a year now. What's the biggest thing that surprised you? I mean, you were a leader of the opposition, envisioning holding this role multiple times in your career. What's the biggest surprise about the role or the scope of the premier that you never even imagined?
One of the things that has surprised me a lot is the talent of our civil service in being able to implement our agenda. I mean, I'll give you an example. When I came in, we didn't have a policy around achieving net zero by 2050 and being carbon neutral. So we created a policy document on our emissions reduction energy development plan. We devised an investment tax credit. We passed it into policy, and it is now the law in Alberta. And the federal government still hasn't passed theirs into law, and they started 2 years before us. So the speed with which our civil service is able to take our ideas and implement them has been a big surprise to me. And the nice part about it is I've got very ambitious ministers. And so when I look across all of our policy initiatives, I think we have 261 mandate items, and then a total of 400 different items because of issues that have emerged since we've gotten into office. They keep track of how they're doing. We're 61% of the way on all of those initiatives, at least started all the way through to completion. And I talked to my top civil servant, and he said, we're going to get them all done before the next election. So I've been delighted to see that the civil service really does live up to that, what they're supposed to be doing, which is giving good policy advice, but also that they're the neutrality that they bring to it. They'll give, sometimes if they think that we're doing something in a way that could be done in a better way, they give that advice. But they've really surprised me at their ability to implement our platform.
And I completely agree that the civil service in Alberta punches way above its weight. I want to go back in time a bit because it has been almost exactly a year since the election. And it was an election where you ran on a tax cut. You ran on tackling the affordability crisis and protecting public health care. And since then, your policy priorities have not necessarily matched up with the platform that you ran on. You explicitly did not run on leaving CPP. But you brought that forward. You didn't run on the provincial police force, but you've given your government the power to bring a provincial police force in. And you didn't run on the restrictions on gender affirming care. Now, on the other hand, you did run on public health care, but then massively increased for-profit surgeries and actually canceled the South Edmonton Hospital. And the tax cut that you ran on has now been put off. So how do you explain to Albertans what feels a bit like a bait and switch?
As I said, we've got over 400 items now that we're working on. 61% of them are underway, and we'll have 100% of them done in time for the next election. You can't get everything done in your first year in office. And so and there's a pacing issue that you have. You can't pass all of your legislation all at once. So the things that we did work on immediately was the Taxpayer Protection Act. So we're not going to see tax increases for personal corporate income tax without a referendum. We did move on the expanded scope for mental health and addiction. We're spending $1.5 billion now in that portfolio. We moved on expanding the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. We started with $1 billion. We've now got a $3 billion loan guarantee. And it's such a popular approach that British Columbia is doing the same thing. The federal government is doing the same thing. And I'm very excited about how that is going to transform our relationship with First Peoples and lead to true economic reconciliation. We're doing an immense amount on career and technology studies. Nate just announced the expansion that is going to allow them to serve 4,000 more apprentices. And we've increased the number of apprentices year over year by over 50%. We've got the new entertainment district in Calgary that is well underway, and they're going to be able to see the team in the new event center by 2027. We expanded the feeder assistance loan guarantee program. We brought through our 25% seniors discount. I mean, there's a number of things that we campaigned on that we are already implementing. The number one promise, though, that I think our government has made to the people of Alberta is that we would do so within the framework of a balanced budget. I mean, we have seen successive deficits year after year after year. $80 billion, of course, run up under the previous government. And we know that that is not sustainable. So we're going to balance the budget. And if it means we have to take a little bit of time before we know that we can afford the tax cut, then I think Albertans understand that. And so we've put a proposal in the budget to start implementing that in 2026, fully implemented in 2027. And then there'll be one more platform commitment that we've implemented.
And so just Cheryl, just so you remember, that was your government's $80 billion of debt that you had to inherit. And
I was actually I was
I was
actually going to
watching
give
your
the
face.
premier credit there because she said that so much more kindly than Erica ever throws that at me. So thank you
Well,
for
she's
that.
the premier. She's way nicer and more polite than the whole purpose of our podcast, which is to do it respectfully. I was just respectfully reminding you,
Thank you for that.
Premier. This is the banter that I'm sure you've seen on the podcast, Premier. I kind of want to flip the script a little bit because on the podcast, we've talked about Bill 18, 2021, and that the narrative that was out there about the provincial government fighting with municipalities. I've come on to try to explain the government's position. It's been a little bit tricky. I've spent hours briefing you on things. So now I'm going to ask you to brief me on really what's happening there. And I know there's been some amendments to Bill 20. But we're still seeing the Alberta municipalities, the RMA, come out, maybe not standing lock in step with this government. So what can we expect there, and why was this something that this government was going so full steam ahead on?
Well, I'll talk about Bill 18 as a for instance, and because it annoys me that we send so much money to Ottawa and we don't even get back an equal per capita share, whether it's for funding for our post-secondaries or whether it's for housing accelerator funds for our municipalities. That really was the impetus behind it, is that how dare the federal government come in and tell the city of Calgary and Edmonton, you'll only get this money if you do things our way. And now you've probably seen in Calgary, they have an investigation going on about whether or not this money was tied or if it wasn't. And that's a terrible position to put municipalities in. And it's unfair. There's only 8 municipalities that received housing accelerator funds, and we've got 350 municipalities in Alberta. Same is exactly true on post-secondary. We have 13% of the population. We have major innovation happening at U of A, U of C, Lethbridge, Athabasca, and yet we only get 9.5% of the research funding. I was just meeting with the University of Alberta president this morning. They have an amazing all-university, including SAIT and NAIT, proposal to have a $100 million fund to study how we get to net zero with hydrogen carbon capture, and they didn't make it as a finalist in trying to seek federal money. Why not? These are the kind of things that I think we can add a voice to, is that we want to make sure that we're getting the appropriate share of dollars back here, and that the different entities are not having to jump through hoops and do things that I think are counter to the interests of their various constituencies just to be able to get some federal funding. So that's part of the reason for Bill 18. Bill 20 was really just a collection of a number of problems that had been developed over the last 18 months. As you know, Municipal Government Act is a huge piece of legislation. We've got elections coming up. And so we had about 20 different things that we needed to address in this omnibus legislation. Clearly, the municipalities are upset about 2 of the provisions, so we brought through amendments to narrow the scope of when we might step in to kibosh a bylaw and when we might step in to remove a council member. And I think they will see that we will be very measured on that. There's only been one instance in that we've had to remove council members in the case of Chestermere, and the report is out on that. You can see some of the reasons why. And there's been 2 instances that I recall where we had to cancel a civic bylaw. In the case when Edmonton wanted to retain their mask and vaccine mandates after our public health officials had told us that we could go in a different direction, and then when Calgary refused to change their local access fee to bring it into alignment with the rest of the province. So I would say that people will see in the way we implement that bill that it is not what they fear. It's going to be used in only a very narrow set of circumstances, and we'll consult with the municipalities on what those are. And then Bill 21, there is no question it is essential for us to be proactive in stepping in when tragedy strikes, when wildfire strikes. I was just watching the terrible Netflix story about the Camp Fire in California, where the local resources got completely overwhelmed. And I never want to see that happen in this province. We have the ability with helicopters, with night vision, with our ability to use infrared, unmanned aerial vehicles, with the firefighting force that we have, with the ability to bring in firefighting teams for the rest of the country. Why would we sit back and just say, oh, call us if you have a problem? That would be irresponsible. And so that's part of what Bill 21 is. It's just letting the municipalities know that no matter where they are in the province, if we see an instance where we think that we can step in, lend a hand with unified command, we're going to do it. And so we've actually gotten some very positive feedback from those who are on the front line of firefighting. We certainly got some very positive feedback from Wood Buffalo about how we were able to do unified command up there, which for a very, very serious threat. And so I think with the passage of time, people will see that this is the right way for us to approach these disasters.
So if I can just jump in quick on that, I think one of the biggest criticisms that I had difficulty defending was the piece on the consultation. And I know you've addressed that in some of your press conferences, but maybe if, while we have you, you could dig a little bit more. And I know you've done some further consultations with some of those stakeholders, and Cheryl and I've talked about how regulations work, but maybe just because I think that was the hardest part, was this narrative that you weren't listening or consulting. So maybe just nip that in the bud for me.
I would say that when I look at some of the excellent consultation that we've done, and I think Adriana LaGrange has done some tremendous consultation. We're making a lot of changes in healthcare. She did 65 or more in-person sessions. I think she talked to more than 3,000 frontline workers to give them an idea of where we were going. And I just think that has really allayed a lot of fears and a lot of concerns. And I think people are giving us the benefit of the doubt as we're trying to do the right thing for our frontline workers on that. So I think that's a model of really good consultation. If I had to do it again, I think in releasing these bills, I probably should have been a bit more hands-on in having some of those same kind of sessions. We could have probably done some town halls or telephone town halls, because it's a big province, telephone town halls with elected council members. We probably could have done a bit more to walk them through on what it is we were doing and why, because I think some of the things may have caught some by surprise, because we had heard about some of the problems from other municipalities. So we probably could have done a bit more work after we revealed the bills to explain where each of the different provisions came from. So I'm going to have to do some of that work over the summer. I've got meetings that have been set up with both the head of the RMA as well as with the urban municipalities. And I hope that we can maybe clear up some of those misunderstandings.
So switching gears a little bit, I want to ask you about Take Back Alberta. And I know if you could see Erica right now, she's probably cringing because she hates every time I bring Take Back Alberta up on this podcast. But they are the group that takes credit for pushing Jason Kenney out of the seat that you now sit in. And so my question to you is, how much influence, because this is a big piece of the UCP membership and a very organized piece of the UCP membership, how much influence do they have on what you're doing, and how far could you be pushed by Take Back Alberta?
Well, look, I would say that we have a very large and active membership base that come from a lot of the different groups that are called the Freedom Movement. Take Back is one of those groups, but there's multiple others. And there's a few issues of concern that have, and you see it in our policy sessions, you see it in the policy that comes forward, you see it in some of the policies that they pass. But I would say that there is no one person or one group that has an influence on our government. We consult very widely. We talk with people from all backgrounds, from all associations, and then we try to make what we believe is the best decision for the stakeholders and for the province. And I think that's a healthy process. You have to hear from everybody, and you have to be able to say, okay, I agree with this, and we think it's good for the province. We're going to act on that. There's some that we might be able to partially implement from our policy, and then there's some that we're not going to be able to implement at all, because on further consultation, it either won't work or it's not the right decision. So I would say that the policy process is always very important in every political party. It's a bit of a gauge of where the membership is, but you can't necessarily act on everything that gets passed in a policy convention.
So Take Back Alberta doesn't have any specific influence or sway over what you're doing as Premier of Alberta?
No, I would say that my members, because we have really large, I think we've had the largest conventions ever now in not only Alberta history, but I think the Canadian history. And I think our one this year is going to be even bigger. And when you get that many people together and they're passing policy, and they're passing them with overwhelming majorities, you have to take note. You have to say, okay, well, this is what the grassroots Albertans who are conservative minded believe that we should do. We should take some policy direction from that. But I believe very strongly in the policy setting process of our party. I've even talked with our president about how I'm looking forward to having what I'm calling an accountability session when I go to our AGM, where we look at the policies that were passed and we talk about the ones we were able to move on and why, and the ones that we weren't able to move on and why. And I think that's the healthy relationship that any political party has to have with its membership.
Yeah, I think that's sometimes a misconception of like what happens on a policy floor and when your government, what becomes, legislation or policy. So I look forward to listening to that. Usually it's like a fireside chat where now we're just having more of an accountability moment. So looking forward to that in November premiere. One thing I actually wanted to get your take on, because there was a policy that I just loved. I think I used damn good policy about
Shocking.
4 times quoted on this. And it was actually one that didn't get much airtime. And I wanted to kind of understand what the government's update is. It was on the ankle bracelets for high risk offenders. I know that was something that came up in the election. There's not all announcements or all policies are going to get the airtime that you want, but maybe like because it was announced at the same time as some of the expanded scope for sheriffs, why was that the decision of your government? I think this should have been a standalone. I think it's like the best, even from a non-ideological standpoint, where you can actually see that public safety come to fruition. Maybe walk us through that and then what this looks like, because I think this is a great demonstration of being tough on crime. And I'd always say be tougher, but I'm not there anymore to say that.
What I would say is we thought it was actually quite complimentary because it shows that our sheriffs are really doing policing functions. We have found that there have been areas, especially as the RCMP have reduced their ranks, where there's 400 vacancies within the RCMP, and it's caused us to have to ask our sheriff to do more on highway patrol, more on specialized units that shut down drug houses, more on the fentanyl problem, more on integrating with policing in Calgary and Edmonton. And so if you're going to ask your sheriffs to get higher training and do policing functions, then you've got to govern them like a policing entity. And that means having a separate police commission, because that's how police commissions operate. They have to have that independence from politicians. And I think people should have some appreciation for all of the incredible work that our sheriffs are doing. And the fact that so many people now want to work for sheriffs because we're offering these opportunities for them, and including fugitive apprehension. This is dangerous work, and we're having our sheriffs do it. And one of the ways in which we're going to make sure that the bad guys don't go out and commit more crimes is to have the 24-hour ankle bracelet monitoring, because we now have a federal government that's making it more and more difficult for us to be able to keep really bad folks behind bars. We're trying to work on that at the federal level by getting some of the policy changes. But in the absence of that, we've got to keep tabs on people. I mean, there was just this horrible tragedy that happened in St. Albert of a young 15-year-old boy out walking with his mother, who got stabbed in the neck and is killed. There are really dangerous people that are out there on the streets, and we've got to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep tabs on them so that they don't reoffend. Ideally, they wouldn't be let out in the first place. But again, it's federal jurisdiction, and we've got a little bit more work to do to try to convince the federal government to tighten that up.
Can we expect more tough on crime policies in the near future? And I like calling them that instead of public safety, for the record.
Well, look, it's no secret. We campaigned on compassionate intervention, and having gone through and removed the encampments in cooperation with the Edmonton Police Service, we now know that there's 200 to 400 really hardcore addicts that, no matter what we do to offer support and help, are not availing themselves of it. One of the stats that we saw in a recent presentation is that there's one individual who overdosed and was taken to hospital 186 times. It costs an average of $6,000 per hospital stay. It's $1 million for that person to be constantly going through and needing that kind of intervention. On top of that, when people are on crystal meth, getting violent, it creates public harm. We've already seen as well with the disorder that happens with the encampments. They aren't just a place for people to stay; they're a place for crimes to be committed, and organized crime and drug dealers were taking those encampments over, making it very dangerous. So you'll see that we will move down that path of compassionate intervention. We want to do it in a way that we believe is going to be compliant with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's going to take a little bit of time. But I think that's what people expect of us. They want to be able to go downtown, enjoy a hockey game, and not feel like they're going to get assaulted when they're walking back to their car. And that's what we owe it to Albertans to deliver on it in both of our major cities, and increasingly in our mid-sized cities as well.
Premier, I want to ask you sort of a pointed question. Since you've come to power, your party and even you personally have weaponized misinformation for political benefit. And I don't say that lightly. I will give you an example of what I'm talking about. Earlier this year, you tweeted that the Calgary City Council was trying to give permanent residents the right to vote. Now, I know that you know that was not the case in this situation, that the motion that was approved was asking that the city forward a joint resolution to the Alberta municipalities. But at the time, that narrative that like, look at this crazy stuff that the city is doing really helped in moving forward Bill 20. And although this kind of sharing misinformation or tweaking the truth does help your party in the short term, what do you think that what impact do you think this kind of discourse has on division in Alberta in the long term? Because the comment sections under those posts, which are still up, are racist, they're bigoted, they are wild comment sections, and this kind of misinformation just feeds that.
Well, they did vote in saying that they want permanent residents to be able to vote, and our Constitution says that you've got to be a Canadian citizen. I guess I would ask the question, why is it that they're even passing these resolutions in the first place? Clearly, they would implement it if they had the power to do so. And they're trying to create an environment where they put forward policies that are completely outside of their scope, and they normalize doing those kinds of things. We're trying to denormalize that. Stay within your mandate. Focus on the things that you're supposed to focus on, which is making sure the streets are safe, making sure that you have effective fire response, making sure the streets are plowed and that they're built out. Take care of the parks. I don't think people want to see their municipal governments engaging in these kind of divisive ideological battles. If you want to change the Constitution, then I guess you should become the prime minister or you should become a premier. But why would you even propose to advance that policy at the level of council, except for to create a reaction that causes division? So I would say stop doing it, and then we won't have to weigh in on it.
So in short, we should expect more of this kind of intervention.
Well, if the municipalities go beyond what their scope is, and the scope, again, is defined by the Municipal Government Act. And under the Constitution, municipalities do get their power from provincial governments. So yeah, they should focus on the things that their residents want them to focus on at the municipal level and stop trying to go beyond their mandate.
What's something that you're really proud of that like didn't actually, either get airtime or was part of a bigger omnibus piece of legislation, or just even like some policies and conversations that you've been able to have that you're proud of that maybe, again, not every Albertan would see?
Well, there's two. The approach that we took with the Navigation Center, I can't wait to roll that out in Calgary. And we want to see the same approach. One of the things that we learned was that we have a lot of social agencies doing incredible work, but having somebody who's very vulnerable and high needs navigate through 8 or 9 or 10 different services is not reasonable. So in creating the Navigation Center, we've now helped over 3,000 people 900 people get connected with 3,000 different services, ranging from getting their ID to getting connected to the virtual opioid dependency program, to getting shelter, to getting income supports. In one case, a woman getting reconnected with her family after 10 years of thinking that she was because she was on the missing and murdered Indigenous women's list. Like, those are really powerful stories, and there's hundreds of them. But connected to that is the work that we're doing in our corrections facilities. Just this week, our 4th correction facility opened a therapeutic living unit. And that is a place where inmates can say, I want to get clean. And then we put them on a different floor, run them through a really intense program of therapy. They're up at 7 a.m. and they don't finish their therapy until 8:30 at night, working on themselves and reconnecting with who they are, their family, understanding why they're addicted, understanding and confronting the damage that they caused to those around them, figuring out how they're going to get employment again. I just had the great pleasure of going and visiting the Red Deer Remand Center on the weekend. And I'm telling you, like, the one question was asked to me, and they were genuine about it, is, why are you doing this? No one's ever invested in us this way. Why are you doing it? And I think the reason we're doing it is because every single one of us have a family member or friend who's been there, who could have either has been in and out of jail because of their drug addiction, or they're on a pathway where they're going to die if we don't intervene. And I just I think that we're changing a lot of lives there. And I can't wait to see, going forward a few more years, these kinds of units rolling out in more of our floors at our prisons. And I hope we can convince the federal government to do the same thing. No one else is doing this in Canada. And I think it's going to be incredibly influential on changing the pathway for so many people.
Premier, you have been so generous with your time today. I just have one more question for you. And this one hopefully is a little lighter. I'm wondering, and like if I was the comms person briefing you for this meeting, I would say the answer to this question is I'm just focused on the job I'm doing now. But I want to know, how does the UCP get reelected in 2027? And do you plan to be the person leading the party through that election?
Yes, I will be the person leading the party through the next election. And I would say that we get elected by showing that we identify problems and we solve them. That to me is the essential role of government, is that you have to go out and listen to stakeholders and people in your community and find out where things aren't working for them. There's a lot of people who need the help of their government to be able to assist them, whether it's short term or long term. And if we're making it difficult, then it's our job to solve those problems. So I hope that's the reputation that we develop, that we're not complacent. When we hear a problem, we want to make sure that we jump to it and fix it as quickly as we possibly can, so that we're aiding the people who voted for us.
Well, thank you so much, Premier. As Cheryl said, we know you are a very busy woman, so we cannot thank you enough for making time for our season 2 ender of the discourse.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks, Cheryl.
Thanks, Premier. Well, I will say Premier Smith upheld her reputation, a clear, concise, very, very talented communicator. I will say, even on the tougher questions that I offered, and you offered one or two in the midst of your softballs, great answers. I mean, not necessarily answering the question straight on, but she knows what she's doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think one, that's fun. It's always fun to, interview a former boss or your competitor or anything like that. So when Rachel comes on the show, I'll have a grand old time. But
there's got to be some incentive for her too. Like, you can't ask there has to be some softballs. Otherwise, why would she come on with her former staffer?
Yeah, well, and I would like to say, like, there was some stuff I wanted to push and figure out the government's rationale on some things. But I think that there is, like, when I asked that last question, yeah, it was a fluff ball, but I think that would actually showed me, the premier, like the Danielle Smith, I really love that not everyone gets to see. And you saw that compassion that she came out with of what she's proud of. It's like some of the work that they're doing in the prisons with helping people find the recovery they want, some of the social services that they're bringing forward. Like, typically, you would focus on like job numbers that this government has continued to see grow, the large amount of people coming to the province. But she took it to a very emotional and just at her core, helping people that are in need.
And I mean, I don't think she quite answered some of my questions, but totally agree. The government has followed through with many of the things that were in its platform. I even looked back at its platform before this episode. But affordability and healthcare were the number 1 and 2 issues of the campaign. And those are the places they've fallen short. So I think for a lot of voters, like, following through on the number of things that she listed there aren't necessarily making the impact on their life that they felt electing the UCP would have done.
Yeah, but I do think a lot of those things are longer term, right? They've made some pretty, big changes to healthcare, but you're not going to see that return on investment in day one. They focused on frontline healthcare. We've seen some numbers of improvement, but again, like a lot of those that the campaign, like affordability is a huge issue. It's a national issue, and they have put measures in place. But I think it's not the quote unquote low hanging fruit that you can reference today. So I think that's why maybe I don't want to say danced around, but couldn't point to those 2 items, because they're generational changes, and it will come back to her record in 2027. Glad to see that she's sticking around. I didn't have doubts on that, but to hear it out loud, I'm glad that maybe I'll be in another war room. Who knows?
Yeah, can't wait. The other thing that I thought was interesting was the question of misinformation. Like, I think we all know now that City of Calgary Council tweet that Danielle Smith put out, I think we all know that was absolute misinformation. The council has said that they knew they didn't have the power to pass this as a council to give permanent residents the right to vote, that it was always a joint motion that would be discussed at Alberta municipalities. And the tweet, like, if you click on that tweet, the comment section underneath is radical. Like, it is, like, the comments are
pretty
wild.
Sure what you told me last week was that comment sections don't influence public policy. So,
no, but I'm not saying public policy. I'm saying, like, you as a premier, your misinformation is inciting division in Alberta. And that was my question to her. And that one, I will say, she completely dodged that question and basically said, like, I'm going to keep doing it.
Well, I mean, in fairness of how they're going about it as politicians, I hear Rachel Notley fear mongering and leading misinformation all the time. So I don't think that you're saying you can say that Danielle Smith maybe
That's
not
such a
answering the question
deflection.
to your full. Well, answering the question, I do think what she did say, and I think it's valuable, is that the job of the one, why would you bring it forward if you weren't going to bring it? Why wouldn't you have a co-signed motion by a bunch of municipalities as opposed to doing it in council outside of your scope? Like that to me, again, I think that the way City of Calgary went about it is completely out of their jurisdiction, completely out of their mandate, and they're not doing the core services. And if I was the government of Alberta, I'd be frankly frustrated that
Okay,
it's
let
like
me use another
pass
example.
motions. Okay. Fire away.
Okay, that's how I get you to stop talking.
Example.
Okay. I have another example, and this one, honestly, this one blew my mind. And this is just a case of leaving out really important information. So when you look at, so the premier had posted a tweet about how Fort McMurray was under evacuation order because of wildfires. That's not misinformation. That is absolutely the premier's job to share that information. But over time, when the premier talks about wildfires, she never acknowledges climate change. And I know her talking point is that almost all of these wildfires are human caused, but we also know that there are more human caused wildfires because climate change has led to conditions that lead to more wildfires. And because she's left these details out, it's almost a dog whistle to the comment section, who, if you go in there, it's crazy. People think that there are liberal armies going into the backcountry in Alberta and starting fires, and no one's telling them it's not true. When Danielle Smith stands up, she's saying these are human caused, these are arsonists, these are people lighting fires or being delinquent and inadvertently starting wildfires. And the comment sections are crazy, and no one's doing anything to tackle that misinformation. And that should be the job of the government.
But why is that piece so critical to you? And I would ask you to come at it from like a non-ideological standpoint. Like it sounds to me that you're pushing the climate change narrative that would make it doesn't change the outcome. It doesn't change that people need to be more responsible. The message is, if there's a fire ban, respect it. These are what cause wildfires, and what we all need to do is be safe. So like, I guess my question is like, why does climate change need to be a part of the message? Because it's not part of the solution. The message to people is to be safer when you're outside. It doesn't need to scream up and shout. Like I get ideologically where you're coming from, but from a message by the premier on what's causing it and what you're supposed to do to prevent them, it wouldn't change.
But pretending that climate change doesn't play a role in the conditions that lead to more wildfires is leaving out an important part of this whole problem.
But why? Like, I don't, what does that do? What does that do to an Albertan to change how they're going to act?
Well, if I'm an Albertan and I need motivation to do my part or change my behavior or interact in the economy in a different way because I'm worried about climate change, and all of the other pieces haven't bothered me so far, but the threat of a wildfire in my community is enough motivation for me to change my behavior, then yeah, I think people should understand that climate change plays a role in this.
So is your issue like you think that the government's climate deniers? Because I don't believe that that is true at all. I think that they're just talking about the cause and effect and what people need to do. And frankly, if you're a person that doesn't care about the environment until it's about you starting a forest fire, a wildfire, I don't know what the population looks like.
My point of this was that there are a lot of people who support this government that are ideological or radical enough to believe that Justin Trudeau has sent troops into the backcountry in Alberta to literally start wildfires. And the UCP has no reason to stop that belief because it's actually politically helpful for them. And that's just an example. There are other examples. That's kind of a wild one. But there are other, I can put my tinfoil hat back on.
Good use.
But I do think that the UCP has used misinformation to their political benefit. Like where it helps them, they're happy for it to continue.
I would argue that that's probably not the intention. I can understand why you're going that route and painting maybe the party with a stereotypical brush. But to be honest, I don't think that the government's doing that from any other reason than like it doesn't really change what you're going to do and your human responsibility, regardless of the temperature changing 2 degrees or not. So I think it's just more about the messaging, and in your party, I would expect that they would lead with that, right? And it's just maybe that ideological difference, but I don't think they're doing it to motivate maybe the far right.
So this has gone down sort of a different track now than looking back at the last election.
I mean, we
think
had
that
wildfires last election.
it's true.
Kind of.
Great segue. That's a great segue.
Yeah.
I think looking back, it's interesting because now we've been a year out from the last election, and hindsight's 2020, no question. But I do think, like, thinking back to the RIP period where you and I both worked on opposing campaigns, I do think it sort of support did toggle. Like, I do think the NDP was ahead for the first 2 weeks of that campaign and poised to form a majority government. And then, now that we have the benefit of hindsight, some things happened in the last 2 weeks that really moved support enough for the UCP to come out ahead. But before maybe we talk about that, maybe it's worth looking back at how we felt about it then.
Let's start with the debate, because it was interesting. I mean, to see two current premier, former premier, two women leaders, the only leaders on that stage. Cheryl, what was your big takeaway of the showdown between Rachel Notley and Danielle Smith last night?
Well, I'm sure you will be shocked to hear me say that I do think that Rachel came away the clear winner. She brought an optimistic, a hopeful, a detailed plan for Alberta's future, promising a doctor for every Albertan, promising to make life more affordable for people, and laying out a pathway to get there. On the other hand, Danielle Smith made it through an hour without saying anything crazy. That is not a win, even if the bar is that low.
Hey, so Erica, there you go. Notley's the clear winner. You guys should pack up and go home for the rest of the campaign. I'm sure you have a differing view on how it went.
Yeah, and as Cheryl said, shocking that she's going to think Rachel Notley came out with the win. I can tell you that from the momentum and all of the journalists that came out saying that I will give Rachel Notley credit. She is a very good communicator. I think she held her own, but did not even compare to the performance we saw from Danielle Smith last night. She, unlike Rachel Notley, doesn't run away from her record. She talked about the record of the United Conservative Party. Rachel Notley couldn't talk about what she was trying to get across. She couldn't talk about anything but, being angry and attacking Danielle Smith. I think what Albertans want is a premier that will act like a premier. Last night, we definitely saw Rachel Notley acting like she was auditioning for the role of the leader of the official opposition.
And that's what job she got. Know what's funny? We're feisty. We're like, I like us better now. Like, I mean, but you also know, I was like, Cheryl's, I can tell you what her talking points going into that were, and same for me, right? Like, we kind of reiterated the same things. Very different than now, because that is, was our jobs to be pundits when people trying to convince people to vote for our parties, where now we get to be a little bit more of commentators.
For anyone who couldn't see it, that was the CBC Power and Politics clip where Eric and I got to go head to head every week during the campaign, and where this podcast really was born out of. But yeah, definitely.
So shout out to David Cochran.
Yeah, and not quite as kind to each other during those head to heads. So just looking at what I said in that clip, because now that we look back on it, I do think the debate was actually sort of a turning point for the campaign. And I don't think that people really saw it for what it was at the time, because truthfully, both of those leaders had great performances at the debate. And the conditions for what would be considered a win were quite different for both of them. Like, Danielle Smith at that point, the biggest criticism against her was that she wasn't a credible leader, that people couldn't trust her. And Rachel Notley really had to come away with, she had to really win a debate on all fronts. She had to come away with an economic plan. She had to come away being more poised and better spoken than Danielle Smith was. She had to come away with a social plan. She had to come away with a plan to balance the budget. And I stand by what I said in that clip. Like, Danielle Smith's bar was low in order to make it through that debate, but she performed incredibly. Like, her performance in that debate was well practiced. It was, some of her moments in that debate were flawless. Like, she must have taken acting training for that closing statement. But it did the trick. And I think a lot of concerns about her credibility for the job were alleviated as people watched her.
Yeah. And actually, when we were doing that, for folks that didn't watch it last year, how it went was like, we kind of picked like our favorite moment. And that day after the debate, my favorite moment was actually Danielle Smith's closing remarks. So let's throw to a clip here, and then we can dive into the why.
I first want to say how much of an honor it's been to be your premier for these last 7 months. I've been overwhelmed by the generosity and kindness of Albertans that I meet every single day. These last 3 years have been difficult for all of us. And now the wildfires are testing our resolve as a people once more. But I know that together we will overcome every challenge we face, whether it's a pandemic, a flood, a fire, or economic headwinds. We will take care of one another, and we will move our province forward to a better future. My commitment to each of you, if re-elected, is to serve you with everything I have and to the best of my ability, however imperfect that may be at times.
I love the humility. As you said, though, like Rachel and Danielle had very different goals going into the campaign, and well, fortunately for me, but unfortunately for you, that is also when the your budget came out, which demonstrated a 12% corporate tax, which I believe is actually one of the key reasons. Not only the debate, but that was the other reason why I think the UCP was also successful. Was an error in your policy, and it really turned off people that maybe were still on the fence. But what did you think about that? I know why I like it. I like the humility and all of that, but.
I was actually sitting in the studio for the debate. So I watched this in real life. And first I will say, incredible performance by Danielle Smith. Like, having watched her in real life a number of times, it felt pretty scripted and pretty practiced to me, but the general public would have never seen that. I mean, she pulled out emotion, she pulled out humility. There was a well-practiced closing statement, and it was certainly a clip that got played online. And you used it in our Power and Politics appearance that day. It's a clip that got played over and over again, and I think it did do the job. It was a glimpse into how Danielle Smith would be as premier. And I will say that persona, that person that you saw in that closing statement, genuine or not, is the persona that she has upheld as premier. Like, she has been, in terms of communication, very credible and very good at talking about her position and why she's doing things. Yeah. So, well,
I think we saw some of that even in the interview we just had with her, right? Yeah, there is sure. That she's very approachable. She's very level-headed in, what you guys tried to showcase her to be was not the person that showed up to that debate and not the person that she's kind of been since.
Yep. Let's take a look too, because Rachel Notley, although, in hindsight, maybe people will say that Danielle Smith won this debate, it was actually a really competitive debate. And I think Rachel Notley brought her A game. I think this was the best debate that she had as leader of the NDP. And that was evidenced in her closing statement as well.
Tonight, ask yourself, who do you trust to build a better future? Who will focus on the things that actually matter to you? Now, Ms. Smith has spent her entire career campaigning for Albertans to pay out of pocket for basic health care. She's also campaigned to pull Alberta out of the Canada Pension Plan, something that would create huge instability in your retirement. Today, she was found to have broken the law by interfering with our justice system. This is just not how our province should be run. Every day is a new drama. You just don't need to put up with this. Enough is enough. So my offer to you is stable, predictable, thoughtful leadership that you can count on.
A great performance. A great performance by Rachel Notley. But, I mean, Danielle Smith's performance was equally as good, and the bar was far lower for her.
Yeah, but I would also argue that, like, if you want to, and something that we showed in the clip is, like, if you want to be the premier, don't talk about your competition. Don't talk. And I think that was the miss. I think her tone was great. I think that there was a lot of great points, kind of in the middle. I think Premier Smith kind of like sandwiched the debate, was really strong at the end and really starting at the beginning. Rachel was really strong in the middle and really challenged the premier on her position. But I think the biggest takeaway is, again, like one of the turnoffs for folks, or that polling even showed, was that Rachel went on the super aggressive tactic, the fear mongering, the trying to play trust, but wasn't really showing her own ability to be trustworthy. And I think that that's kind of the thing on your closing remarks. You want people to remember you and what you're going to do, not necessarily. Maybe that was your tactic, but I think she spent too much time talking about Premier Smith and not enough about her vision. And I think that's where the NDP overall, as even a campaign, fell short.
Yeah, I mean, we'll never know. I think there was a number of factors. And truthfully, I think discrediting Danielle Smith, not just during the RIP period, but in the lead up to the RIP period, was why the NDP was so successful. And let's not forget, like, despite the fact that we lost the election, it was one of the most successful elections for the NDP in Alberta's history.
And I hated week 2. You guys had a really strong week 2.
And that was, I mean, the reason we were so strong there is because that trust narrative was working, because new videos came out of Premier Smith saying things that people didn't think were becoming of a premier. And so it was a balance. And for sure, I heard that feedback as well, that we went too negative, that we didn't concentrate enough on the positive. But to be honest, people will always say they hate negative campaigning. But if you don't discredit your opponent, if you don't tell people why they should vote out of government, they won't know.
Yeah.
So
I think
it's a tough
just
balance.
and it totally a tough balance. And I think maybe it was like more the tone that was coming out versus the messaging, or that Rachel had to wear it and she was the lead, as opposed to, having more of a pitbull other candidate that's kind of driving that. Again, it's all in hindsight. Like, you guys could have saw that move the needle in a positive way. We were seeing it work for our benefit. But it's been a year. I will say, I think that the premier, whether you like her or not, has been pretty consistent in keeping, a level head, being very affirmative on the things she believes in. But we've also seen a compassionate side, which, again, compassionate Conservatives aren't always what people see in their leaders. And I think she's done a good job of finding that balance and being true to what she wants for her government agenda.
And she says she's in it. She says she's here for the next 3 years, that she'll be leading the party into 2027. But I think over the course of the next 3 years, we will see dynamics shift a lot. And I agree. She's been consistent. She has withstood controversy quite well. Her numbers in terms of overall horse race numbers have held pretty solidly. But like we discussed in previous episodes, there are a few cracks starting to show, and things could get more difficult for Premier Smith. One, after there is a new NDP leader elected. And, the NDP has a bit of a refresh, and the NDP is now, it's sort of in a very quiet period right now. And once there's a new leader elected, things will look a lot different for that party. And then secondly, I think what could have a massive impact is a potential change in the federal government. And that dynamic, which Premier Smith has almost built her entire identity on fighting Justin Trudeau, will impact how people view her.
Definitely. I mean, we'll see, the shaping of the NDP, and how that will impact the dynamic between the premier. I don't think that should change a government agenda, but to your point, again, someone new sitting across the aisle in legislative session, I think this summer is going to be really critical, because it's going to be the launch of a new NDP leader. It's going to be, as Premier Smith said, a lot of consulting and maybe building back some of those bridges from this legislative session, and again, ramping up what's going to come in the fall. And the federal government, I mean, I don't anticipate that it'll be over a year before that. But building that bridge with the federal Conservatives will be critical, because we didn't see, Stephen Harper always going 100% to bat for Alberta. He was the Prime Minister of Canada. So assumptions should not be taken. And there's still a lot of work to do with our federal partnership. But it's
so what does
helping
that mean?
her right now.
But does that mean
think
that Danielle Smith can keep up like fighting the federal government and pushing provincial jurisdiction, even if she has an ally in office in Ottawa?
I think it's going to be a very different relationship. I think it's going to allow for a reset. It's not just Alberta. You have a lot of Saskatchewan and some of the Maritimes or Atlantic Canada provinces feeling very similar. So, and I know that Saskatchewan's heading into an election, so we'll see how that heads out. But I have trust that Premier Scott Moe will stay in his position.
Disagree.
Well, yeah, I know. That's because you have to. But anyways, what I was going to say is just like, I think that there's going to be a big reset on what that relationship looks like, because right now federalism is not working. It's not that balance of powers. And so, but again, I think that you can speculate that your partner will do everything that you would want. We'll see. I mean, we've even seen, say, Pierre Poilievre not come out on capital gains. So if that's something that Alberta's against, but regardless of federal, you just have to have that. And you've talked about it with the NDP of being able to have a good federal relationship. I think that door was never open for Premier Smith to Prime Minister Trudeau. I think that it would help reset that relationship and that dynamic.
And then the other thing coming up is, of course, the UCP will hold their annual general meeting, or is it a convention in November?
It's an AGM. Yep.
AGM. And you guys regularly review, you do a leadership review for the leader of the party, Danielle Smith.
And this is new, because we're only 5 years old, but yes, it is her first. It has to happen within the 4 years. But we have, unlike, some other parties, including yours, an AGM. So it has to happen every year.
And Don Braid wrote a column this week sort of saying like there are some cracks starting to show. There are people that are unhappy with how the premier has implemented policies. There are people who think that the trans youth policy doesn't go far enough. There are people who think that she's been a libertarian rather than a conservative, and she might have a rough ride at the AGM. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, I read the Don Braid article, and I would just say like the people that were quoted weren't actually people. Like they didn't put their names on it. It was like a concerned UC peer, and the mayor.
Love those kind of anonymous sources.
I know.
So
I'm
much
just
mystery.
like, I know. And I'm like, are you really like who, do you actually have this, or did Dawn just find a random person that was willing to anonymously go on the record? So I wouldn't feel like that article had a lot of meat to it on actually causing any concern. The mayor of High River, where the premier resides, came out, but you and I both know he's far more friendly to your side than he is to ours. So again, like I think that the article, let's just say, brush the article aside, the cracks that we're talking about, I don't really see them. I think this was a really tough legislative session, but he sounds like, I mean, the MLAs are going to have to go back into their ridings and talk to their local municipal governments, talk to their stakeholders, and by that I mean constituents. And so there's still a lot of runway to address maybe some of the concerns that were raised about this legislative session or what we're going to see in the fall. And ultimately, though, like I think we keep growing in numbers of who's coming to the AGM, which I don't think is a downfall. It's probably just frustrating for the party to having to keep sizing up how they do things, but it's not concerning to me. If I was actually hearing it from the grassroots or the people that I talk to all across the province, I would be worried. I think by the time that this happens in November, a lot of that will be addressed, and I don't see a lot of other cracks coming up between now and then.
Well, first, Don Braid's been a journalist for a very long time. So I imagine that his source is a real source, even if they didn't put their name on the record. And I
will say, I want to point that out. When Kenny was in trouble, people were putting their names to it. People were signing letters, right? So I think that like it's not even close to being problematic. There's probably some grumpy people. There's stuff that this government has done that I haven't loved. So, but does that mean that I'm going to vote out the leader? No, right? And I think a lot of it might just be frustration now that will subside. So I would say if the people aren't putting their names to it, I wouldn't really take it that seriously.
Okay, well, we'll watch for that bar, because we do know that
you're going to come to the AGM. It's going to be so fun.
It is typically not the opposition that takes out conservative leaders. It is typically conservatives who take out conservative leaders. So I'll be watching for those names public to know, there's really a problem here.
Yeah, and I again, like if that so happens, I would be maybe worried. But again, if you can't sign your name to something, how much are you really willing to go to bat that this is going to become the reality and not just someone crotchety in the background? But that's it. That's season 2 of The Discourse. That's our show for today. As we've said in previous episodes, just reminding you that we are taking a little bit of a summer break. We do suspect that we'll have some guests wanting to join us in the next couple months. So we'll do some special episodes. And then in the fall, we'll be returning to our regular Thursday slot.
And we don't want to miss any of those special episodes. So in order to make sure you get an alert when we drop them, make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.
The Discourse is hosted by Cheryl Oates and Erica Barudis. Follow on Instagram @TheDiscoursePod. Subscribe to The Discourse on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.